Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
the odds of her getting re-elected grow with every candidate that enters this race.
Alderman Ray Lopez drops out of the crowded mayor's race as others file to secure their spot on the ballot. Look at where the mayor's race stands.
Mass layoffs, falling share prices, and a backlash against owners signals a changing world for big tech.
A local firm buys Chicago's future casino site, what that move means for Bally's.
Ticketmaster apologizes after its botched concert ticket rollout for Taylor Swift's upcoming tour that left many Swifties empty-handed.
It's a lot of untapped talent in communities just like this, but you don't know about it until you actually go there.
We take you inside a new call center helping transform the Chatham neighborhood.
Close encounters with some otherworldly art by a Chicago-based Japanese artist fascinated by art and science.
And the Lyric Opera's music director on what audiences can expect this season.
But first, some of today's top stories. It's official. Groundbreaking can begin at O'Hare. U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was joined by Mayor Lori Lightfoot to give the official green light to the massive new O'Hare Global Terminal that will replace Terminal 2.
2 new satellite concourses that will provide approximately 1.3 million feet of gate and amenity space, dramatically expanding the airport's ability to accommodate aircrafts of all sizes.
Folks understand more and more the importance of our airports for supply chains as well as for passenger travel. And we've got to make sure both of those are running as efficiently as possible. That's part of what this new terminal is going to be part of.
The first satellite concourse is scheduled to be completed in 2027 and the second in 2028. Officials have targeted 2030 for completion of the global terminal.
An angry Mayor Lightfoot took to Twitter with strong words in wake of the Colorado LGBTQ nightclub shooting. Chicago's first openly gay mayor tweeted, quote, "I'm sick of this expletive. How many people need to be murdered? How many lives torn apart until it actually stops? We don't have to live like this, and we don't have to die like this." The 22-year-old man accused of killing 5 and shooting 17 others in the Club Q attack is facing murder and hate crime charges. The club is thanking the, quote, quick reactions of heroic customers who subdued the gunman and ended the assault weapon attack.
The first one in, and now the first one out. Alderman Raymond Lopez has dropped out of the race for mayor.
Today I made the decision to announce that I will not run for mayor because what's for the good of the city is to ensure that Lori Lightfoot is defeated and denied a second term. The odds of her getting re-elected grow with every candidate that enters this race.
The frequent and outspoken critic of Mayor Lightfoot says he will focus on re-election to his West Side 15th Ward.
Coming up in the program, we dig into why it's been such a terrible year for big tech companies.
But up next, with midterms in the rearview mirror, Chicago moves on to its municipal election, beginning with candidate filing. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Dozens of candidates packed into a repurposed Walgreens downtown this morning to begin the 2023 campaign for mayor and city council in earnest. There are now 6 official candidates for mayor, but the biggest news came before the first petition was stamped. Alderman Raymond Lopez, as we mentioned, the first candidate to announce a bid to unseat Mayor Lori Lightfoot, was the first to drop out. Instead, he will focus on running again for a 3rd term as 15th Ward alderperson.
Today I made the decision to announce that I will not run for mayor because what's for the good of the city is to ensure that Lori Lightfoot is defeated and denied a second term. The odds of her getting re-elected grow with every candidate that enters this race.
And WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, who filed to run for mayor today?
Well, As you said, we now have 6 official candidates for mayor, including Willie Wilson, Jamal Green, Cam Buckner, Paul Vallis, Brandon Johnson, and Sophia King.
Okay, just those 6 so far. Why were so many candidates in line right at 9 a.m.?
Well, it gives them an advantage. It gives them entry into a lottery to be first on the ballot. Now, when you have a race this crowded, every percentage point matters, and maybe this will make the difference. Now, you'll notice there were a couple big names not in line this morning. Mayor Lori Lightfoot, U.S. Rep. Jesus Chuy Garcia, and Alderman Roderick Sawyer. They have until 5 p.m. November 28th to file their petitions.
Okay, what impact will Lopez's decision have on the race?
Well, so this is a game of numbers, right? Now, Lopez has been a conservative critic of Mayor Lightfoot, saying that she has not kept the city safe and that she has not handled the COVID pandemic well. His dropping out could benefit Willie Wilson and Paul Vallis, who are the other more conservative candidates in the race. And we saw Paul Vallis put out a statement praising Lopez and welcoming him back to the city council in 2023, making a play for his voters. Will it work? Time will tell.
We don't know yet.
Yeah.
On the other side of the political spectrum, though, Brandon Johnson says that he is the right choice for Chicago's progressive political community. Here's what he told reporters.
Everyone has a different motive. I can't speak to what his motives are. What I can say is that my motive is based upon what progressives in this city have called for. The mayor of Chicago has been an incredible disappointment to people. She has broken nearly every single promise.
And Heather, who is his competition?
Well, he is keeping an eye on Garcia. They are both progressives. They both have a long history in that community. And the conventional wisdom is that if one of them makes it into the runoff, the other one won't, which makes this very high stakes for those candidates.
Okay, and briefly, Alderwoman Sophia King was asked whether she will try to clear out the field by attempting to kick her rivals off the ballot by challenging their petitions, the Chicago Way. Will that work?
It could, because if there's a progressive lane and a conservative lane, you want to make sure that you're one of only a few choices for voters looking for that alternative. Again, will it work? That's what we're going to find out.
Find out in February. You got to wait. Heather Sharon, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brandon.
Of course. And you can read Heather's full story on our website, where you'll also find Heather's guide to the 2023 race for Chicago mayor. Of course, it is all at WTTW.com/news. And now to Paris for a look at some issues in the world of big tech. Paris.
Brandis, it's a trying time for big tech. First, you have Elon Musk's chaotic reign at Twitter, where money is going out the window and decisions seem to be done and undone in the same day. For instance, reinstating former President Donald Trump. Add to that the shocking collapse of crypto trading company FTX and controversial billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried. And on top of all of it, the entire industry has seen a wave of layoffs and falling share prices. Just this month, some 35,000 tech workers have reportedly lost their jobs, adding to the more than 100,000 tech layoffs that have already taken place this year. And joining us to help us unpack all of these problems are Ben Jones, an economist and professor of entrepreneurship and strategy at Northwestern University. Jones previously served on President Obama's White House Council of Economic Advisors. And Ben Zhao, professor of computer science at the University of Chicago, where his research interests include social networks and the security and privacy issues that come with them. Great expertise for our discussion today. So Ben Jones, let's talk with Elon Musk's $44 billion purchase of Twitter. All these layoffs happening. Then he asked some of them to stick around. Folks are wondering whether the platform is going to survive day to day. What's the outlook?
It seems like a bit of a vanity project for him as opposed to a great business decision, and I think he's starting to see the challenges that come with that. He's obviously an incredible entrepreneur, and what he's done with Tesla or SpaceX, those are really incredible companies, really changing the world in some ways. I think with Twitter, he's putting his foot in the communications pond, and he likes to tweet himself, and he's kind of mixed up in it. And he's got a company that doesn't have a great balance sheet, and he's in trouble. So he's cutting costs rapidly, getting rid of a lot of workers, and looking for something that's going to provide a growth trajectory, but it's not clear that he's going to find that.
And Ben Zhao, he's helped Donald Trump find his way back to the platform after he said there was going to be a content moderation council. Kanye West is back on after some anti-Semitic statements. Is this the kind of thing that could further frighten advertisers and investors off?
Yeah, it certainly seems so. Just anecdotally looking at sort of, my corner of the Twitterverse, seems like a lot of users are really turned off by some of these big moves and moving off Twitter in droves. So it'll be interesting to see what the impact on the user base actually is after all the dust settles.
And Ben Zhao, it seems like they're throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what's going to work. Do you think they'll find some magic formula?
Yeah, that's not at all clear, right? So I think obviously there is a lot to fix, and perhaps some of the steps that Elon is taking make sense. Cost cutting and certainly getting rid of some of the fat. But I think some of the other steps, including getting rid of significant portions of the moderation team, I think that's going to have a real tangible effect on what the content, moving forward looks like on Twitter. I think that's going to have a real impact on how users react.
And Ben
So yeah,
Jones,
that's what I'm looking at, and I think.
And Ben Jones, you've had both Republicans and Democrats talk about some kind of regulatory apparatus for Twitter and social media. What kind of framework do you think they might be able to agree on?
It's tricky with Twitter because Twitter's not a profitable company, particularly. So for them to go on and take on content moderation in some big and effective way, they don't really have a lot of resources lying around to do that. It's not clear that they can. If you were Facebook or Meta, you could do that. They have lots of profit. They could invest much more heavily in moderation. So I think where a company was super profitable, when we do see a lot of these Silicon Valley giants that are very profitable, I think there's more opportunity to regulate them and ask them to do fairly expensive things that might be in the public interest. Twitter's a more complicated case.
Ben Zhao, what would ideal regulation of this industry look like?
Boy, you got me there. I think it's a real tough nut to crack. I think for starters, perhaps fixing some of the corporate structure in some of the stock offering that Meta, for example, has put into place. Just having the possibility of some board control over, a CEO, for example, I think that's a good start. Obviously, with Twitter, it being a private company, I think the regulatory options there are much more limited.
And another private company in a lot of trouble, FTX, the cryptocurrency exchange. Sam Bankman-Fried, a young hotshot CEO that got all this investor money, all these folks to invest their money with him. $3 billion now he owes. A brief synopsis of why this company failed so mightily.
Well, there's a lot of hype along crypto. People think they're going to make money by buying it and seeing the value of these tokens go up. And a lot of people have made a lot of money doing that. But is there substance behind crypto? I mean, that remains an open question. To the extent that crypto is trying to replace ordinary money so you and I and Ben can conduct transactions, has always been pretty debatable. It doesn't look a lot like money. It doesn't have a stable value. It's kind of hard to use. And then the other part is that we have to trust in money, right? We have to believe in the value of a dollar. We have to believe in the financial institutions that we use to transact with each other. And, Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX tried to pretend that they were this trustworthy exchange and market, even though they didn't want to be bound by US regulations. They wanted to stay offshore, even though they didn't want to take on anyone on their board from their investors. It has all sorts of signals that would say, don't trust this organization. And sort of the, things have come home to roost here. So I think crypto is in a lot of trouble in general. I think people are realizing that at least as currency, it is not, it doesn't have the characteristics that we want and that people should have a lot of faith in. And that's why Sam Bankman-Fried seems to be going from a hype billionaire in some sense to a former billionaire pretty quickly.
And Ben Zhao, that was going to be my question to you about crypto. Is this a sign that crypto is collapsing? Because you add that to the fact that the price of Bitcoin has steadily dropped since its height at around $70,000 per coin, I don't know, a year or two ago.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, Bitcoin has always sort of operated on belief, right? And so it is an interesting artifact. The technology underneath is not particularly magical, but I think as an artifact, it is interesting. As a community, as a sort of a platform, there's lots of opportunity. The question is whether the technology is going to catch up in time. But yeah, for sure, it's looking like it's risky. I would say that there's still a lot of belief. There's still a lot of financial institutions who have, after a few years, finally bought in for the promise. So we'll see if that's sufficient. That's enough to sort of get by this winter phase that it's going through.
All right. Also, in the tech world, you've got Meta, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg laying off thousands, a lot of tech companies laying off thousands. The common thread here, we're talking about these these almost celebrity CEOs, Sam Bankman-Fried, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, are tech investors too swayed by the power of these personalities?
Quite possibly. I know I've done research with a bunch of colleagues trying to look at where high growth startups come from in the economy and from whom. What are the characteristics of those people? And if you get together all the startups in the United States, you see that the highest growth firms come from people age 45 when they found the companies. It's not these 20-somethings. But there's this myth, like another kind of hype, around the young, brilliant entrepreneur, some of whom are young and brilliant and start incredibly successful companies. But I think there's this intermixing of signals where people try to play off that image and then can attract a lot of investment, even when there's nothing really substantive there. With Elon Musk, who is a proven entrepreneur, Mark Zuckerberg is a proven entrepreneur. I mean, there's an issue that, do they get overconfident? Do people believe that whatever they think is right because they've been right before? It's a bit like hedge funds as well. You invest in the hedge fund that did well last time, but will they do well again? Often we learn that people aren't perfect in their forecasting of what's going to be a big hit.
Yeah, and maybe Sam Bankman-Fried in a different category than Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. Ben Zhao, we mentioned all the layoffs throughout tech. What do you think the drivers are?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in any sort of normal business cycle, you have over exuberance in hiring, and then you have sort of downsizing. And in a way, this is pretty much as expected, right? With the interest rates rising, you could sort of see this from the tech industry. The only question is how, severe would it be, and what would prompt that first wave of layoffs? And Meta having its own trouble sort of business-specific issues, when it started its layoffs, really, laid the groundwork for everyone else to jump on and say, yeah, it's time to downsize and trim the budget quite a bit.
And maybe the metaverse not taking off as investors had hoped at this point. Well, we're glad that you, Ben Jones, and Ben Zhao joined us here in the real world, and thank you so much. And there's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so please stick around.
There's a lot of bad blood between Taylor Swift fans and the company selling tickets to her next concert tour. Last week, Swifties attempting to buy pre-sale tickets for her new tour were met with massive delays, error messages, and certain frustration before Ticketmaster announced it would be canceling the sale to the general public. The ticketing giant apologized, citing technical issues and not enough tickets to meet the demand, saying, quote, "Even when a high demand on sale goes flawlessly from a tech perspective, many fans are left empty-handed. For example, based on the volume of traffic to our site, Taylor would need to perform over 900 stadium shows. That's almost 20 times the number of shows she is doing. That's a stadium show every single night for the next 2.5 years. Joining us now are Selena Fragasi, music writer for the Chicago Sun-Times, and Britt Julius, music critic for the Chicago Tribune. Thanks to you both for joining us. Selena, let's start with you, please. First, explain for us what happened when the tickets went on pre-sale.
Well, basically, Taylor broke Ticketmaster, if you want to put it in simple terms. Her Eras tour was announced. There was going to be a lot of demand behind that. She's one of the biggest recording artists of our time. She has 76 million Facebook followers. She took all top 10 spots in the Billboard charts when her album came out. So the fact that Ticketmaster was saying they weren't going to anticipate this demand is just kind of ridiculous. So the pre-sale happened on Tuesday. Unfortunately, a lot of people waited hours and hours in the queue, did not get through, and by Friday, they had canceled the general public sale.
And in Taylor's response, she responded on Instagram saying that she and her team had repeatedly made sure that Ticketmaster could handle the volume and were repeatedly assured that they could. But this is not the first time that Ticketmaster has come under fire for its handling of ticket sales. What are the major concerns here?
Yeah, not even the first time this year. I mean, Bruce Springsteen, just a few months ago, there was dynamic pricing that was happening with his tickets where a lot of people were not able to get tickets or they were going for thousands of dollars. So Ticketmaster really has come under scrutiny a lot this year with their practices. And of course, if you go back to the early 90s, when Pearl Jam brought allegations against the company as well. And I think now that Live Nation and Ticketmaster have merged for 10 years, they're doing a lot of things that people are calling into question if that's really good for the fans.
Okay, I want to come back to that in a bit, but I want to get Britt in here because, Britt, there's also an issue with bots buying up tickets, ticket scalpers as well. Is there anything that Ticketmaster or even the artists themselves could do to protect the actual fans who want to buy tickets?
Yeah, I mean, there's artists like I'm thinking of someone like Ed Sheeran, who when a lot of his tickets were bought up, he actually sort of canceled the resale. It was, I think, there was a number like 10,000 tickets that were available for like resale with high prices. So he canceled those immediately. Oftentimes, artists will require that anyone who has a ticket who purchased it will also have a photo ID to go along with it. So there are things that artists can do, and so learning that big artists, someone like an Ed Sheeran can do things like that makes you think, why aren't certain artists taking those precautions to make sure that their fans are able to get tickets in the first place?
And additionally, the cost for attending concerts have gone up. Tell us about that. What's causing that?
There's a lot of different reasons for why the costs for tickets have gone up. I mean, one, obviously, there's a much larger demand. A lot of people, they had plans to see artists before the pandemic actually happened. And then, now the demand has increased. People are being much more choosy in terms of the concerts they actually want to see. So they're not necessarily going to the smaller shows, but they are going to wait and save up to see a much bigger artist that they've been waiting for many, many years. But just in general as well, everything else in the world costs a lot more money. You're paying more for the crew that's on a particular show, not paying like minimum wage, to pay people for, to be the sound person, to be the tech person, to be the makeup artist, things like that. It costs more money for food. It costs more money for gas, just across the board. When these big sort of, mega stadium arena shows were happening back in, 2018, 2019, prices were significantly lower than what they are now. So that is another reason that sort of contributes to those things as well. A mix of higher demand as well as, just a general need because of the state of the economy.
Combination of factors. Selena, how is the Chicago music scene affected by what Ticketmaster does?
Yeah, I think Chicago's in a unique position because we really promote a lot of our independent venues and artists here. We have places like Metro, Empty Bottle, Lincoln Hall, Shubas, who do not use Ticketmaster. They use other avenues, whether it's eTix or Eventbrite in some cases. So I think you have a model here that really could be for the rest of the country to follow by promoting independent venues. We have the Chicago Independent Venue League, which really came about during the pandemic as a way to save our stages. So I think, in Chicago's local music scene is thriving. So if anything, maybe this will put more focus on, more underdog musicians that people maybe didn't think of, but now will because tickets are being overpriced for these other artists.
Britt, same question to you. To what extent do you think smaller venues and smaller artists are affected by Ticketmaster?
Well, one thing that I would say, even though, Chicago does have, this great scene and we have lots of local venues, there is this huge competition for shows as well. The delay in shows and delays of venues being closed for so long has made it really difficult for a lot of, local artists to be able to get some of those opening slots or to just be able to kind of have their own sort of headlining shows throughout the city. You have so many more artists who are national or international who are trying to do tours as well, So there's like a much larger competition to get in those venues. Luckily, though, I feel like I'm always hearing about new venues that are opening up all the time. We had a number of venues that opened up during the, the height of the pandemic, which is sort of crazy to think of. So there are going to be more opportunities for people to perform, and more places are sort of presenting, different or unique opportunities for people to perform outside of traditional sort of music venues or music halls. But there is a greater competition just to be able to get those slots. And yeah, to have, reasonably priced shows for local musicians.
Selena, give us a sense of just how dominant Ticketmaster is in the online ticket market.
Yeah, I mean, since they merged with Live Nation in 2010, that's 12 years of a partnership that now is one of the biggest in the entertainment industry. And part of the problem, too, is the ticket fees that they're adding on to their tickets, which are really impacting fans as well. In fact, Hollywood Reporter came out last week or a couple weeks ago with the report that they've made $7.3 billion in profits over the course of the one quarter this year, a lot of that being the ticket fees because they can be 78% of the ticket cost. So, unfortunately, with the monopoly that they have, and this is why Senator Klobuchar has gotten involved to look into the antitrust breach or a possible one, I think they may end up losing their stronghold, but for right now, they're very dominant.
In 20 seconds, what could the Justice Department or the government do?
I think look into it. I think do what, Pearl Jam brought this up 20 plus years ago and nothing really happened from it. But I think now if anything, we know Taylor Swift is powerful. So I think maybe it'll do something. Yeah.
If we didn't know before, we know now. Thanks so much to our guests. We'll have to leave it there. Selena Fragasi and Britt Julius for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Up next, a Chicago-based Japanese artist shares her fascination with science fiction. Stay with us. Do you think there's been sort of a rethinking of how those events happened here in Chicago?
I made a promise to myself in my career that every year I would make a piece of art dedicated to the memory.
Got into a zone of mentor to children. See what we can do to kind of elevate each other. We all we got at this point.
I'm using my past to push forward, to build a movement to create the world that we all want to see.
In post-war Japan, a child grew up wanting to write fiction. Instead, she came to Chicago and began to paint fiction. Her artwork is a combination of science fiction and fact. Producer Mark Vitale has an introduction to the work of Chicago-based artist Michiko Itotani.
We visited when the gallery was closed. There were no people, and on canvas, also no people. The unpopulated environments suggest settings for sci-fi stories filled with rockets, planets, books, and music. In short, art and science.
Science and art really represent humans' hope.
The work is about inner space and outer space.
Outer space, all the way out there, we don't know. But when you really think about it, you don't know how your mind is working. And both are unknowns. And that's what I'm interested in.
Here's the artist as a child in Osaka, Japan, before she spent half a century in Chicago teaching at the School of the Art Institute and painting. Michiko Itotani sees her work as fiction that invites viewers to read things in their own way.
In my youth, I wanted to be a fiction writer. And somehow what I'm doing is using the painting language to write my fiction. That means I'm inviting the viewer to participate and complete my painting.
Look closely at some of her paintings and you'll see the Hubble and Webb telescopes. She admits that she's obsessed with deep space telescopes and their view of the cosmos, and yet...
It's a huge achievement for humanity, but if you look at that cosmically, it's a teeny little achievement.
Her artistry is curiosity, trying to know the unknown.
Well, that's keep us going, and we are all responsible for us to find the purpose of the life, meaning of the life.
An important tool in her painting process is her optimism.
The future, this is a very hard time. We need to be super optimistic. It's impossible to be optimistic, but I wanted to be optimistic. It's important to find a way to exist somehow.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
And the show is called Celestial Stages. It's at the exhibition space Wrightwood 659 in Lincoln Park until December 17th. You can find out more on our website. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, a railway strike looms over the nation, but what are the local implications? That and more business news from Cranes. Chicago Lyric Opera's new music director talks about 2 hit productions and the future of opera in Chicago.
It's a lot of untapped talent in communities just like this, but you don't know about it until you actually go there.
And we take you inside a new call center helping transform the Chatham neighborhood. But first, some more of today's top stories. The clerk of the Circuit Court of Cook County's office is no longer under federal court oversight. A federal judge dismissed the consent decrees and court orders which have been guiding the office's hiring process since 1983. The clerk, Iris Martinez, called it a, quote, great day for the office, which handles the documents for hundreds of traffic, civil, criminal, and juvenile courts in Chicago and suburban Cook County. Former Chicago Cubs pitcher John Lackey is in the running for the Baseball Hall of Fame. Lackey is one of the 14 newcomers on the Baseball Writers Association of America's Hall of Fame ballot. Lackey, seen here pitching for the Cardinals, was part of the World Series winning Cubs in 2016. He also won Game 7 of the 2002 World Series for the Anaheim Angels as a rookie. And he has another World Series ring with the 2013 Boston Red Sox. The next batch of Hall of Famers will be announced January 24th and then inducted on July 23rd in Cooperstown. And now to Brandis for some of today's top business headlines. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. A local private equity firm buys the site where Bally's plans a big casino complex. A national strike looms as one of the country's largest railroad unions votes down a tentative contract, and expect a surge in airline travel this Thanksgiving week. Here to go behind the headlines is Crain's Chicago business reporter Danny Ecker. Welcome back, Danny. So a Chicago private equity firm bought the site where Bally's is planning to build that massive casino complex, planning to lease it back to the casino giant. Tell us about this firm, why Bally's is working with them, and what this means for the approvals that the company still needs.
Yeah, so this is a layer of complexity to this Bally's casino plan. The company that just bought this site for $200 million is called Oak Street Real Estate Capital. They are a private equity firm that specializes in basically buying real estate from big companies and leasing it back to them. That's effectively what they're doing here. Bally's signed a 99-year lease for the site where it wants to build this big casino, and they'll pay Oak Street rent. And Oak Street's actually also going to put up as much as $300 million to help build out this complex. It's interesting because it means there's more vetting to do for the city and the Illinois Gaming Board. They both still have to approve this project before Bally's can move ahead. And it also puts a spotlight on Bally's financial situation. Can they pay for this project? That's something the company says is not a problem, but the Illinois Gaming Board especially will be considering that as they figure out whether they're going to grant a license for them to operate.
I'm sure they will. So moving on, the Smart Transportation Division, they say members voted down a railroad contract, which means a strike could happen as early as December 5th. A railroad contract, of course. What are the local implications here, Danny?
Well, this is a big railway union that rejected the compromise reached back in September between labor leaders and railroad companies. Other union groups have actually approved that, but if one or more of them goes on strike, that could be crippling for shipments of things like coal and drinking water and other essentials. Chicago is obviously a major hub of rail activity, so a strike here would have a big impact. Obviously, for many commuters, I think that's where a lot of people would feel it. There could be stoppages on rail lines from Chicago to the western suburbs and northern suburbs that would disrupt about 80,000 daily trips. That's about 60% of the area's rail passengers.
And Danny, lastly, airlines report an expected increase in travel this week for the holiday. What kind of surges are they anticipating, and how does this compare to years past?
Yeah, it's going to feel like 2019 again at airports this week. The number of passengers has been actually building up for the past week. It actually eclipsed 2019 levels last weekend. United Airlines says it's expecting a 12% increase year over year in Thanksgiving passengers. To roughly the same as what they saw in 2019. Leisure travel has been coming back strong overall. We've seen it in Chicago the last 6 months, but there's also been a little bit of a slowdown in air travel recently with inflation and broader economic slowdown, kind of the things that we're seeing. But certainly this is a very welcome week for airlines as they battle inflation and higher labor costs.
The airlines welcome it, I'm sure. I'm not sure passengers love it when it's that busy, but it's something we have to deal with. Danny Ecker at Crain's, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
Now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Maestro Enrique Mazzola took over as music director at Lyric Opera of Chicago in 2019 with grand plans for the 70-year-old institution. And then the pandemic hit, shutting down production for parts of the last 3 years as COVID ebbed and flowed. And now Lyric is back in a big way with two epic productions going on simultaneously, Verdi's Don Carlos and Rossini's Le Cantori, both conducted by Mazzola himself. And Enrique Mazzola joins us now. Maestro Mazzola, welcome back. I hope I pronounced the French right on that second production, Le Cantori.
Le Cantori, but you should pronounce in French also the first, because we do the French version.
You do the French version of
Don
Don Carlos.
Actually, we should say Don Carlos.
Don Carlos.
Yeah.
All right, well, I want to get to both of those productions, but first we mentioned all the unease over the last couple of years. How difficult and frustrating has it been to steer the Lyric through the pandemic?
Well, you have to know that during the pandemic, I was still music director designated. So I was working on projects that would happen when I would take my position, which actually started last season. This is my second season as music director. You know, yes, we may easily say it was frustrating. I would say rather than in the difficulties, I really wanted to find solutions to make music. And actually, we have produced many videos. We streamed a lot of concerts that we prepared at Lyric. So it was, if you want, a moment very actually creative. So we really put forces together and we learn how to make music throughout the difficulties. So, you know.
Virtual music, but I'm sure you're glad to be where you belong, in the Opera House, in person, with audiences. So Don Carlos, you're doing a rarely produced version of it. It's 4 hours. The more commonly produced version is a shorter version. So why did you choose to go with this one, and how challenging has it been to stage?
Well, the main reason is that we are used to imagine that Giuseppe Verdi, the composer, the Italian composer, wrote only operas in Italian, and that he was thinking his music only through the Italian language. And this is not completely true, because to conquer the hearts of the Parisians, of the French, he had to write an opera for the Opéra de Paris, yes, for the major. And we have to imagine, we have to project ourselves in the 1850s, 1860s. The main opera house in the world was Paris. So Verdi wants to be there, he wants to win the hearts of the Parisians, and he writes a few operas in French language. So Don Carlos, the real Don Carlos, has been written in French language in 5 acts. And so we want to propose something that is true, that really reflects the imagination of this great Italian composer, but the expression also of the singing is so different in French and in Italian. So I like to propose at Lyric Opera things in their original version which reflect the original thought of the composer.
So as you mentioned, the more common one is Don Carlo. This is Don Carlos. It's done in French, and so he was fluent in French then? He wrote this entire opera in French after he'd written the Italian version, or before he wrote it?
No. He wrote first in French.
Oh.
And then there was a translation of the French version into Italian. That's why we think, okay, this was the first. No, this is the first. And I really checked even the manuscript. There is all Giuseppe Verdi handwritten manuscript in French language. So it's not that he was thinking in Italian and someone translated in French. It was born like this. So every phrase, every slur, every staccato is thought through the French language.
And this is getting rave reviews right now, and you're conducting it. You're also conducting Le Contori, which is a completely on the different end of the spectrum. It's a Rossini comic opera featuring a male drag nun. He's dressed in nun drag. So I have to imagine here as a conductor, you're worried about not only the music, but getting the comic timing right. How do you do that?
Well, I would say that it's weird to say and maybe to understand, but sometimes the comic time in music is much easier than the dramatic and serious time, because the composers did the major work for us performers. One singer enters in this moment, is written, the other singer answers in this moment and is written. And when in the drama there are complete empty spaces, long phrases, waiting moments that you have to fill with, of course, emotions. With Le Contori, we are in Rossini world, so it's all about, comedy. Yes,
like Barber of Seville.
Yeah. It's we can compare with the famous Barber of Seville. So again, there is like in the Barber of Seville, Le Contori, who is trying to seduce La Comtesse Adèle, and he tried it in the first act, and because he is unsuccessful, then he has a second act to try again to enter in the castle of La Comtesse Adèle. And of course, through this plot, there are many things are happening. It's really the best Rossini.
So you're wearing these multiple hats. You're conducting both these performances, but you're also the music director. Even before the pandemic, the Lyric and other opera companies had to deal with the question of who are our audiences going to be in 10 years and 20 years. Do you have a vision for that, to keep the Lyric thriving?
Well, I'm absolutely convinced that we make music for everyone. And I've noticed how sometimes in the world, but I may say in US, especially in US, the opera, I've seen something like somehow elitaire, yes? And I'm convinced that it isn't. Opera speaks to everyone, especially because when we see opera, we feel sentiments that we receive from the singers. And I'm absolutely sure that in an opera, which can last, for example, 2 hours, there are at least 30 seconds which correspond with something that we already lived. You know, treason, love,
betrayal,
jealousy, dream, desire, love, and so on. You understand? And because opera goes through all these feelings, there is a moment in which we identify ourselves with what is happening on stage. And this moment, I think, is the magic. And this is for everyone. It's not about elites or not elites. This is for everyone.
So it's important to make sure everyone knows it's not an elitist art form. It's an art form for everybody. Maestro Mazzola, we could talk about so many things. I know you've got both productions happening this week, so a very busy week. We thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much. Ciao.
All right, and up next we go to a call center in Chatham that's banking on the community. But first, a look at the weather.
Back in 2018, Target prompted an outcry when it announced plans to shutter 2 of its Southside Chicago locations. One of them, the Chatham location, anchored a retail hub in the heart of the community for a decade and employed over 150 people. The 100,000 square foot building got a new lease on life last year when Riverwoods-based Discover Financial Services began transforming it into a call center that would employ 1,000 people, mostly from the surrounding area, by 2024. Today, with about 500 employees in place, Discover leadership says their community-focused approach is paying off. Producer Erica Gunderson has that story.
And I do thank you for your patience. I certainly do appreciate it.
By the time we're fully ramped up, there'll be about 10 million calls a year that's funneled through this customer care center.
In the 11 years Watisse Gathings has worked for Discover Financial Services, she's managed call centers across the country.
For me, well before being a Discover employee, I was a girl from the South Side first.
Gathings' role as Regional Operations Director of the Discover Customer Care Center in Chatham is something of a homecoming for the former Southsider. But it's also something of a departure, since the dense urban Chatham has little in common with Discover's other call centers, all of which are in suburban office parks where the workforces are majority white.
There is this ecosystem of family and connectedness unlike we have at any other location. We're proud that almost 90% of our employees live within 5 miles of the center. We've been operating for a little over a year. We have well over 150 employees that have been promoted, and some of them have been promoted multiple times since starting here.
CEO Roger Hochschild says when Discover began making plans in 2019 to open their first new call center in over 20 years, the company took a fresh look at their approach.
Call centers are critically important for us at Discover. We're the only major bank with 100% US-based customer service. We picked Chatham because we wanted to do what we could to bring opportunity to communities that had been underinvested. And I strongly believe that's something that large companies can do, and only large companies can do, which is bring jobs at scale into the community. Close to 90% of our employees here in the center are Black, and so as part of our focus around diversity and equity and inclusion, and changing the racial makeup of Discover, this center is critically important to that. The attrition rate is less than half of what we see in our other centers. There's a faster speed to proficiency. This is our best performing call center, and I couldn't be more excited about that.
Greater Chatham Initiative Executive Director Nidra Sims-Fears says Discover's success story thus far shows it makes good business sense to bank on Chatham.
We have good housing stock that's affordable. We have good schools. We have good transportation. We have able and willing workforce, and we have good retail. What else do you want?
Employees at the Chatham Center say working close to home in jobs with growth opportunity is paying dividends for them.
I was really, really fortunate that this was available for me. So it's been kind of like a dream come true because I can be a mom, a really, really great mom, and I can come to work and be in corporate America, essentially.
Before, I wasn't able to basically be in the family's life at all, really. I wasn't responsible for dropping my daughter off at daycare or picking her up because I wasn't able to. Now I'm able to. With the hours that I have now, I can pick her up.
Everything I needed to know about working in the call center, they trained me to do it. Everything I need to know now about doing my job as a technical apprentice, they're training me to do it.
In addition to drawing from the community for its workforce, Discover scaled their service needs to allow them to contract with small local businesses.
We just want the opportunity. We don't want any handouts. We don't want anyone to give us anything pro bono. We just want you to point us in the right direction, and we'll pull up our sleeves and we'll show you that we're capable of doing work on this magnitude and even bigger.
The Chatham Center also features a community center, which local nonprofits can use at no cost for meetings and events. The rotating selection of art filling the space comes from I Paint My Mind, which curates arts from local artists for businesses.
They're getting this incredible art in their space, so they get value and that incredible service from us, but also knowing that that helps I Paint My Mind deliver much needed and often underfunded arts programs to local schools is way more than a cherry on top for us.
Discover leadership says this model of community investment as a business decision has created a whole new blueprint for future endeavors.
It's really transformed us as a company. I like to say we actually get more out of this than the people of Chatham.
That's what allows us to translate that into good business for us to make sure that they thrive, and through that, they take really good care of our customers in return.
The business results speak for themselves. Again, as I said, this is our top performing call center, and so we are committed to Chatham for the long term.
And 1 year in, the employees we spoke with say they're all in on Discover too.
Often, bigger companies are scared to come into communities like this, right? They're scared that they won't get the right talent or just they won't be successful. And I think Discover said, well, we're going to take that chance.
It's a lot of untapped talent in communities just like this, but you don't know about it until you actually go there, and that's what Discover actually did.
I can't wait to see, like, a year from now, how it's changed the community and the people within it.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
And last week, Discover announced it's applying the Chatham model to Whitehall, Ohio. The company says it'll invest more than $16 million in building and staffing a new customer care center in that region beginning next spring. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. One-on-one with Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia as he joins the crowded race for Chicago mayor.
And the impact a potential rail strike could have on Chicago's transit hub and the nation's commerce. Now, coming up next, stay tuned for WTTW's annual live Great Treasure Hunt sweepstakes drawing hosted by our colleague Jeffrey Bayer. He'll be selecting the winners for some of this year's biggest prizes, including a brand new car. So, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
Yeah, good luck, everybody. I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.